All right, here we go. I welcome everyone to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your host, Bernhard Guenther. And my special guest today is, for the third time, Tom Montalk, and he doesn't need an introduction. Viewers and listeners of my work are very familiar with his work. His website is montalk.net, montalk.net. Welcome to the show once again, Tom.
Oh, thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. So we want to dive deeper into what's been happening, obviously on a political level, and then look at it from a deeper level, more the fringe, occult, even hyperdimension level of what has been happening. But just to recap, basically things maybe didn't turn out as we thought they would turn out around election time, with Trump getting out and Biden getting in. So what is your general view of what happened, with the election fraud, with the insurrection, so to speak, at the Capitol and all that?
Well, all of it seems very, very artificial to me, because I think it's just a continuation of the same trend that we have seen for the past couple of years, where we're seeing basically an exposure and a failure of all levels of the system. Okay. Starting out, back with the, even with the coronavirus, for example, the lockdowns, we had many issues with, when you eventually had the riots, the Black Lives Matter riots, things like that. People started to see how city councils and mayors and governors were in on a corrupt plot to basically destroy American society and American culture as we see it, under the guise of social justice and fairness and everything like that. But a lot of these sociopaths, they wear the skins of their enemies. It's not just wolves in sheep's clothing. I mean, they wear the skins of their enemies. So they pretend to care for America. They pretend to care for fairness and equality, but everything they do is the exact opposite of that. And that's the best way to go if you want to really screw things up. You have to portray yourself as the 180-degree opposite of what you actually are. And then you have to blame your enemy for what you yourself are doing, as a typical, narcissistic projection phenomenon. But, so we had city councils, we had mayors, governors, and then when it came time to have the election, now we also saw the failure of the election system due to the widespread voter fraud with Dominion voter systems. And I'm sure there's other voting systems that weren't even talked about that had problems too. And then, of course, the Electoral College and Congress was supposed to be a safeguard against that, but we saw that fail as well, where we had various legislatures send alternate slates of electors to D.C., but when it came time to vote on whether to even hear their case and whether to investigate, these claims of voter fraud, well, of course, we had Mike Pence kind of backing out on that under a very a BS excuse about why he didn't have the authority to make the judgment. I mean, he didn't have the authority. It's not that he lacked the authority to. It's not that he lacked the authority to cancel the election or to put Trump back in power. His only job was to say, okay, well, we might need a little more investigation, so let's send it back to the states. That's all he had to do. He didn't even do that. So definitely he played the part of a Judas in this entire equation. And as we all saw, the outcome was not pleasant. However, from the Trump side of things, from everything that I saw, Trump knew what was going to happen. You could already tell days in advance that he knew that Mike Pence wasn't going to back the plan. And there was a change right around January 2nd, between there and January 4th, where there was a more sullen or downcast vibe to Trump's speeches and his presentations. And that was a sort of turning point, and a lot of people noticed it. And people were trying to figure out what's going on with that, and they had different theories. One theory is that Trump was actually threatened with, maybe some sort of a nuclear blackmail, which means if you don't give up in your quest, then we're gonna nuke DC. We already got nukes there ready to go off. That was one theory. Another theory is that they're ready to unleash another bioweapon. Something way worse than COVID. Just to do like a scorched earth policy. Mm-hmm. But for the people who follow the actual QAnon material, everything that's been happening so far fits within that. And the only error that people made, including myself, was thinking that that team did not have the the courage, I mean, the balls basically to take it as far as they did. I figured that they would play it safe, that they would, okay, 2020 election, we're going to win. And then boom, that's the end of it. We're going to clean everything out and everyone will be happy. But it doesn't quite work that way, because on the assumption, okay, let's say that Trump did win in 2020, like, I mean, legitimately won and fully won, and he's in the White House now. Now you still have about 30 to 40% of the country that sees him as a dictator, that believes that Biden would have been way better, that still buys into the mainstream media narrative. And you still have institutions like the FBI, the DOJ, the Federal Reserve, all still going about doing their thing. Those things have not yet been destroyed and fully discredited. Okay. So in the end, if you want to have actual true national unity, you have to show people, not necessarily the people that are already convinced, but the people that have yet to be convinced, the level of corruption and failure in the entire system. So basically what I'm saying is, I think what the team that's backing Trump, I think what their plan is to, it's an interesting thing. They're using similar methods to what the New World Order type factions have been using for a long time, which is problem, reaction, solution, order out of chaos. The whole thing about the Great Reset. One way or another, there's going to be a Great Reset. The only question is, in whose favor? Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's one way of looking at it. And we're not even getting into the idea about, Trump possibly being just another, good cop, bad cop faction of the New World Order and all that kind of stuff. But I'm saying, like, strictly within the theoretical framework, that there is a positive thing going on with, the whole patriot movement and everything like that. Under that assumption, there's going to be a Great Reset, and they want to burn the system to the ground in order to rebuild it in a new and better way. So they're literally building back better, but in a way that's different from what Bill Gates and all the globalists have been talking about. So that's why, that's why I call him ballsy, because I would have taken the easier way out. I would have just won in November of 2020, called it over and get on with it. But they want to scrub out the wound. They want to really dig in there and just show just how crazy things get, and then the failure of the entire system all the way up to the Federal Reserve, which hasn't happened yet, but I'm convinced it's going to be happening pretty soon here.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Some good points, because I was also surprised, especially after the quote insurrection, which very much staged at the Capitol, right? All of a sudden, then, they regroup at the House, and all of a sudden everybody, even the Republicans, go against Trump, and they rest their cases, no election fraud, and boom, just smooth sailing, as literally they have their speeches written already, knowing that there was a quote insurrection in all of that. But it was surprising to see that, I also felt like Trump just gave up and just retreated, no nothing. And we all were kind of waiting, have our own hopium, so to speak, of let's take those bastards out, let's arrest them and all of that. Even then, especially with the National Guard being at the inauguration, I was confused about that as well, because I thought the National Guard the military only responds to the president, which was then still Donald Trump. Right, but really, it was like a police state coup, the military coup from the quote Biden administration, in the sense to maybe ensure his inauguration. But we can get into that as well, the question like the military loyalty towards Trump. But you made a good point, because I see this now as well after a few weeks now with Biden, in a couple of weeks, Biden in power. The system is exposing itself even more. The corruption, it becomes so obvious, right, in a sense, and people cannot really blame Trump anymore. So even the quote normies or even more left-leaning people see hold on, something is wrong. And you're absolutely right. Maybe it ties even what Q said as well. You cannot people tell the truth. You have to show them, and we have to walk through this dark. So maybe that was quote part of the plan. Because in the end, when Q also stopped dropping, right around the sort of election, then, all the anons, all of us, we made up all kinds of theories trying to connect the dots, what would happen, and a lot of it, had not much to do anything with necessarily what Q actually was talking about. He was not necessarily predicting all of that, what we hope would happen, right? And then, unfortunately, a lot of people became disillusioned. A lot of us fuck this. And then we get into, Q was maybe a psyop and this and that, controlled opposition. But you're right, there's a silver lining on some level that it triggers people even more towards an awakening, and the game plan is maybe longer than we expected, right? And instead of just let's just arrest a few bad guys right off the bat. Yeah,
I mean, there's several things that hadn't happened yet, according to that particular timeline. One, like I said, was the downfall of the Federal Reserve, which would, I mean, if that were to happen, I think, I think people see, here's the thing. People were expecting someone like Trump, a sort of a daddy figure to come down on the establishment and from the top down, from the position as president to use force to remove the Federal Reserve and replace it with something new, or remove this or remove that. But like I said, I mean, if you were to try that, you would demonstrate to probably a third of the country that you are indeed a dictator, and you would inspire. I mean, you would justify the whole resistance movement. The resistance.
Yeah,
you would justify that. So what you would have to do instead, like you said, is show the people. You have to show them. Literally, have to show them. And when you show them, what happens there is they see for themselves what they need to see in order to shake out of their programming. So, but the problem is it's a very rocky ride to go through that. The more stubborn and the more resistant people are, the greater the catalyst is needed to bring them out of that. So that's why I think that the next couple months are probably going to be dicey economically. Yeah. I think we're probably going to see, well, like for example, the whole thing happening lately with GameStop and the hedge funds being taken down by ordinary people. Well, now it's moved on from GameStop to silver, and from silver, eventually it's going to probably move on to gold as well. And one of the things that always stood out for me in the whole Q material was the idea that gold will end the Fed. Yeah. So originally people were thinking, well, what does that mean? Does it mean like, oh yes, we're gonna replace the Federal Reserve and we're gonna go on a gold standard again? But that doesn't really explain how gold would actually cause the end of the Fed. Well, one way it would actually do that is if silver and gold, for example, achieved enough upwards price momentum. In other words, that the price kept on rising, that so many of these elite financial institutions that have been hedging on it not doing that go under. Okay. And so therefore they have to start borrowing money from banks, and banks can't do it. Now they have to borrow from the Federal Reserve. If the Federal Reserve just starts printing money like crazy to cover it, inflation goes through the roof. And eventually you get the collapse of the dollar, and everything that the Federal Reserve under the official picture is designed to do, which is to prevent bank runs and to be the lender of last resort to these institutions. If it fails, it's going down and the entire thing collapses. Then you can rebuild it with a new system, through its own internal failure. So I think that's part of the game plan. I think that's an option. Things are sort of pointing towards that direction. And because of that, I don't think that the whole GameStop and silver run is an organic thing. I think it's actually probably orchestrated at some level. Now, some people were actually theorizing that it's a plan by the Communist Party of China in order to destroy and collapse the U.S. economy, and that's possible. However, a lot of these moves that the left, that the opposition, that the globalists have been making, it's possible to judo flip that towards something positive. So even if they planned it, I mean, it's just like with the COVID lockdowns, as bad as that is, and as bad as that can lead to, at the same time, it's also an opportunity for the opposite to arise as well, just through people's awakening and through all the lawsuits and, all the political representatives that are now rising up as a result of people getting, angry at the authoritarianism. It's only because of the overstep of the globalists that people are willing to now to make moves that can potentially secure a more positive future. So it's a very dicey situation, but it's a necessary situation in my view.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Going back to the idea of showing people, waking people more up, you can even relate it to the evolution of consciousness, similar good if other people need to be shocked out of their sleeping state, so to speak. And maybe, it's also the 100th monkey syndrome, or the critical mass need to rise to a certain level, to higher awareness before even can, let's say, manifest in physical reality in actual arrest, so to speak, right? That interrelationship on a more metaphysical level. But on that note, I wanted to get your insight into, because Q is all about military is the only way, and military is loyal to Trump and all of that. What is your insight into that? Some people talk about, was it the 19th president actually, that US in a cooperation, and in March something is supposed to happen of reinstalling the true president of the republic before it became a corporation, and the military will intervene. So what do you think is the relationship of the or let's say the role of the military right now?
Okay, yeah. So in any free constitutional society, you have different institutions that have different have assigned different roles. Okay, it's not the role of the people to be the first ones to fight foreign wars, or to protect the nation against tyranny. I mean, you've got this whole idea of the people being the militia. Okay, and that's more of like a last resort. That's more like a deterrent. It's the role of the military to protect the homeland against major threats. Okay, so if you did have a tyrannical government, ideally the military would be there to stop that. Okay, and if it isn't, now it falls upon the people to be the final check and balance against that. But I mean, the military is to America what a gun on your nightstand is to you as an individual. It's the last line. Well, it's not the last line, but it's a primary line of defense. Against an actual attack. On the nation. So when you have everything, even up to the Supreme Court, refusing to take a look at actual election fraud, when you have a failure in Congress, when you have a failure in the vice president, and when you have a failure right now due to the installation of Biden as the supposed president, everything has failed. So the only option really left is the military. Now, and don't forget, it was Trump instructing his Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, to put the National Guard in D.C. And this was after the 6th. Okay, so he used the whole incident at the Capitol as a pretext to start pumping National Guard into D.C. and put the big fencing around it and everything like that. Which is interesting because there was another part of the Q material which I didn't quite get at the time, but it makes sense now in hindsight. And Q posed the question: how do you get the enemy to open the door to let you in, to let your forces in? And after that, I think they mentioned something like insurrection, something like that. So which makes sense that if you have the illusion of an insurrection, then you can justify installing your own military within the seat of the enemy's power. Mm-hmm. So that's one theory that I think is plausible. It doesn't mean that that's actually what's going on, but it could explain a lot of things. There's a lot of weirdness surrounding everything since the inauguration and the inauguration itself. People feel it's kind of hollow. There's something shammy about it, and it's almost like a show. It doesn't quite line up. Like in these 10 days, Biden hasn't really taken any trips. He only took one trip to the Holy Trinity Church in DC, and that's only a few blocks away from the White House. Mm-hmm. It's not like he's visiting or meeting with any foreign dignitaries or, going on Air Force One. He hasn't stepped a foot on Air Force One. That's
interesting. He even, from what I heard, came in the private jet to his inauguration. He was inaugurated before noon, which you're not allowed to do because, officially Trump is president until noon and all of that. So you're right. A lot of these weird anomalies. And even where people thinking that he's not really in the White House. I mean, that's maybe a bit of a stretch, but a lot of weird things, and the way the military behaves towards Biden, maybe not really recognizing him as the commander in chief and all of that. So yeah, that's very interesting. What I want to get your take on as well, since we're on that topic of Q and all of that, because obviously since nothing happened, as people hope would happen. Now, yesterday there was this whole, again, relentless crackdown or hit piece on Q by CNN. They had a whole documentary on it, and apparently ex-anons coming out and apologizing and whatnot. It's just disinfo all over the place. But what would you say to people because a lot of people come out now, QAnon was a psyop anyway, it was controlled opposition, it's nonsense. But the way I see it from having studied the drops, that, Q never really specifically predicted something would happen. It just happened on its own. Like we talked about in the last podcast, right? There's a difference between what Q dropped and what people say Q said or how they interpret it, right? There's a huge difference, and especially towards the end of last year, since Q creates so much momentum, a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon and also ate up a lot of disinformation, claiming things Q never said or implied. But, from a viewpoint of a psyop, it seems to be a pretty shitty psyop in a sense, because it really, at the very least, helped to awaken a lot of people to things you and I, maybe many others, are already aware of, and help people to think. And I want to reference something really you posted on Gap recently as well. When you said you checked the Q material and the only actions consistently advocated were 1, unite and organize; 2, share info, it seems to awaken others; and 3, make your voice heard and vote, right? And not really getting people into violence or violent uprising or anything what the mainstream media is claiming Q is.
Right. Yeah. And the reason why, so the reason why the Q material even did that is because it goes back to what I said about how in a free society, you have different institutions that have different, that are granted different authority. Okay. And like I said, that's why it's the role of the military to do most of what people are itching to do right now, which is take down the corruption. So what is the role of the people? Well, during times like these, the role is still to be a responsible citizen. So, to exercise your duty as a citizen, and that includes being educated, being informed, educating and informing others, waking up, and using your power to vote. Now, some people say, of course, what's the point of voting if the entire system is rigged? Well, the answer is the entire system is not rigged. It's only rigged at the upper levels where the most amount of money and power is involved. So that's where, because election fraud is a risky business. It's pretty risky. The bigger you make it, the more chance there is that you're going to majorly screw up. Okay, so local elections, city council stuff, mayors, a little bit up, depending on the region. For the most part, those are not manipulated to the same degree that, governor and Senate, presidential races are. And for that reason, when people do exercise their right to vote, they end up creating a localized sanctuary for their voice. So that's why you can have things like red states, red counties, red cities. You can have these local governments that serve as a bulwark or a wall of resistance against federal power and therefore federal tyranny. Okay, so that's half of the reason why voting is important. The other half is because during the 2020 election, Trump needed an overwhelming vote majority over Biden in order to bring out the widespread level of voter fraud that we saw, the election fraud that we saw. Yeah. And because of that, therefore, we had a huge accumulation of evidence, like with Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and all of them, filing their lawsuits. They had stacks, like thick stacks of affidavits from all these experts and witnesses that were involved in that. And of course, people will say, well, gee, it didn't amount to anything because not even the Supreme Court would take it. But that's not the point. The point is the evidence is now in record. So if and when it comes time to really crack down on it, all that stuff is already there, ready to go. Yeah. So that's why voting mattered in 2020, especially because they needed to bring all that out in order to create the evidence that they needed for later use.
Yeah, I mean, apparently even Trump won by a huge landslide that even the Dominion software crashed, so to speak, and didn't even know how to handle it, right? And you make a very important point. People say, probably caught in the mainstream and just, not understanding how rigged the system is, that, the evidence of voter fraud is there. It is undeniable. It is there, right? It's just not being considered by the courts and judges, right? Who are just, in their own way, blackmailed, who knows, part of the cabal, part of the whole deep state, right?
Yeah, for the most part, until recently, like we had a judge in Virginia, for example, ruling that the late change laws to the mail-in voting system was illegal. Okay, so we had that. We had in Michigan recently, we had a judge ruling that a report investigating the voting machines had to be publicly released. And what they found is that the software, according to these experts, was designed specifically for committing fraud. Okay. And then in Arizona, they recently voted to go ahead and audit the election. So you got 3 different states, all within the past week, I think, that are starting to move forward with that. So people are, they've already forgotten all about it. They think, everything's moving on. And yet coming up from the rear, you start having these legal wins now, So if you look at those and you look at the momentum of where they're going, you can imagine a potential future situation, within a month, well, I'm not even a month, maybe 3-4 months, where it just starts gaining more and more momentum, and combine that with, let's say, impeachment, of the Biden administration, of Biden himself. All this evidence that's been waiting to go, which people wonder, why Trump didn't use it. Why didn't he use his power? Why didn't the administration use all the evidence they had to stop the election fraud? Well, if they had evidence to such a degree that they had 100% chance of taking them down whenever they wanted to, then they would have the luxury of go ahead and letting it play through as it is right now, and then cracking down on it, because then now you get this bonus round of exposing even more of the corruption that exists.
Right. Yeah. Now, I think it goes back to the first point you made early on. It makes so much sense if Trump would have cracked down right away with the military, he would have been painted as full-on dictator, like, falling into the lap of the image they wanted to create of him and project it onto him to begin with. And now it's interesting, you're right, the exposure is happening behind the scenes, so to speak, even like, besides all the big tech censorship, which is also, exposing the corruption, like even more left-leaning people speak out, hold on, there's something off about it, the witch hunt against Trump supporters. I mean, it's all this contradiction or irony, like the left or Biden administration talk about healing and unification, but at the same time, they're cracking down on Trump supporters, right? And censoring from big tech, from Twitter, Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell, they're off of it. They have, I follow them on Telegram, where they, talk about as they continue their lawsuits and all of that. So that's really important to understand. Just because it's out of sight from the media doesn't mean it keeps continuing. You're right. So there's stuff happening behind the scenes right now as well we're not fully aware of, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the issue. I was going to bring up a quick point, which is that's the issue, is that, there is a question about whether or not there's an actual military sting operation or takedown operation in play. But if there is, the military is not going to fully advertise what it's doing. It's going to keep most of it under wraps. And we've actually seen that over the past couple of years. For example, Special Counsel Durham, he's still investigating. He's still investigating the whole Russiagate stuff. He's still investigating the Clinton Foundation. It's expanded to that now. That's still happening. You don't ever hear about it in the news now, but there's stuff going on. And that investigation, for example, it went on. It started way earlier than people ever realized, and nothing about it ever leaked. Okay, so that's already an example of things happening that we just don't know about. We didn't know about it at the time until they were ready, and then we started hearing about it. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, right now we are in the fog of war, in that there's so much out there that we just don't have access to in terms of information, and that's the reason why so many people are trying to read a lot into very little to try and figure out the future and what's going to happen. But I mean, the bright side of it is that, we have a form of crowdsourced intelligence happening right now. Mm-hmm. So everyone on social media, if one person discovers something and it's a really, really good point, people upvote it. Okay, now someone's going to repost it on this other social media network. It starts spreading around. So within the span of a couple hours, pretty much everyone's on the same page regarding that idea. Yeah. Unfortunately, that also amplifies a lot of misinformation as well. So I mean, that's a problem. Some of these data points that people are taking into consideration and kind of extrapolating from, a lot of times they are not even valid, or they're too ambiguous. So therefore you're reading into something that isn't actually there. Yeah. But the bright side of that is that you have a very rapid prototyping of understanding of what's going on. And, you're going to take the misinformation with the explosive truths as well. But I think as long as everyone has discernment and doesn't, attach themselves to one theory entirely, then, you just keep on iterating as more data comes in, and your understanding just keeps on growing. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. No, very good point. It's but you made a very important point, the fog of war, that you don't give away your strategy. Even I remember one of the last Q drops last year was just Durham. And that's right. It's been going on behind the scenes for a while and it keeps going on. And regardless of all the drops information Q puts out, in order to educate, obviously, if you're a high-level military sting operation, you don't give away your strategy because the enemy is listening in as well. But at the same time, us researching, we trying to figure out what is happening next and all of that. And then I feel sometimes this weird aspect of, remember one of the C material, when you have certain expectations of what will happen and whatnot, you actually prevent it from manifesting. So all these predictions that never happen anyway, but it always happens in the way we didn't expect it to happen. Does it make sense?
Yeah. I talked about anticipation killing the future. So if you expect and anticipate something and you hinge your ego on that, it tends to block it from happening. And now you can use that towards good. Like, if you're the one thing I always keep bringing up is in life, when you finally have that great comeback, and you want to use it towards someone, and then that situation never comes up again, so you never get to use that awesome comeback that you're planning on using. It's because you're prepared for it, so it doesn't happen. Right. But I mean, in this case, I think about that a lot. So I do think about that quite a bit, and whether it's better to turn the news off for a week and then let things kind of quantum morph in the background. And then when you come back, maybe it's good, because if you're looking at it every hour of a single day, what if that kind of pins things down and keeps it from being fluid enough to move in the way it has to? Right. But it's kind of tricky to try to prove or disprove that, right? Because especially nowadays with information moving so quickly, it's not like 10 years ago where you can just turn off the news for a month and then you come back and you didn't really miss much because nothing significant ever really happened. But information now is moving so rapidly that people are pretty much glued to their screens, keeping track of what's going on. And I mean, this is a rare time in history, things moving so quickly.
That's an understatement. Yes, exactly. Everything is in a flux, and we can talk about this as well maybe in the second hour, how this ties maybe into a timeline reality split, intersection of 3D, 4D, and all of that. That's also occurring on this planet right now. But, just to play devil's advocate, to satisfy some people maybe in light of what they call Trump or PSYOP, controlled opposition, which doesn't make, for me, it's never that black and white. And I see a lot of people who jumped on the Trump support team and Q all of a sudden now backpedal and go the other extreme. Oh, it was a PSYOP, was contra pro, because their expectations, as you said, anticipation didn't happen, right? So they had a certain expectation, didn't happen. Now all of a sudden they go the other side, right? Of, I feel even throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but how would you even see, like, rationally, in the sense that Trump and Q are a true PSYOP? I know there has been this article going around, somebody posted in the Truth of Community, even Alex Jones talked about it, about some sort of 1920s Bolshevik revolution that was also like a contra-pro, like trust the plan, which they made the correlation. I read the article and it's very, in my view, was very poorly written, a lot of logical fallacies and doesn't make a sense. His argument was basically, a lot of people that Q helped to pacify the people because it projected the savior image, which is true on some level. People project the savior image, that's a trap in itself, but it seems a bit far-fetched. So what is your view on that?
Yeah, so Operation Trust was a plan back in the 1920s to basically get the resistance movement against the communists to expose themselves. So you create this image that there is a resistance movement, and that you can join it, and you thereby end up exposing yourself and then thinking that something's going to happen when it actually isn't, because it's controlled opposition. So that's what it was. It was controlled opposition. But the similarities are only superficial, and I would like to remind people that Trump himself and others involved with him, including Steve Bannon, they're avid students of history and strategy and cunning. And they know about things like Operation Trust and the art of war, and so many of the strategies. You're going to go back to Roman times, Greeks, history, everything like that. So, but one thing that they've always used is they've used these tools to do something different with them than what was used in the past. Okay, human psychology has been the same for thousands of years. As long as genetics stay the same, human psychology stays the same, and because of that, the same methods tend to work on a population. Okay. And that's why Hitler, for example, and the Nazis were able to rise to power so easily, is because they knew how to play on people's psychology. Now, you can use those exact same methods to take it in a different direction. If you want to bring America back to a constitutional republic, you can do that using that. You can use these methods for, all sorts of different things. If you want to turn them fascist, you can do that instead. So just because some of the methods are used doesn't mean that the outcome is exactly the same as, these tyrants have used throughout history. In the case of the Q material, number one, the Q material started on an image board that was full of anons, meaning anonymous users. Okay. None of them were identifying themselves. In fact, it was discouraged or against the rules to identify who you were. Mm-hmm. That's pretty poor if you want to start something to identify who the resistance is, right? Trying to bring these anonymous people into discussion. Number two, it's actually done more to awaken people than any sort of true negative psyop would have been. And you have people who were former Democrats, who were former Marxists, seeing things that they didn't see before, and therefore joining, the side of light, I guess you could call it. So, they're actually increasing the actual genuine resistance to the globalist agenda through the so-called psyop. So I do think it was a psyop in the sense of being a propaganda ploy by the Trump administration to kind of weaponize their grassroots support. And by weaponize, I'm talking about making them more professional and more informed, cluing them into real, happenings behind the scenes, mm-hmm. and to really make that burgeon. But I don't see any evidence that it was strictly a negative psyop, So it's definitely psychological manipulation going on with that, as there is with any political campaign. Mm-hmm. Even marketing is a form of psychological manipulation if you think about it. Yeah. So you have to look beyond the superficial similarities and look at what's actually being accomplished. We know what the ends are, and that's why I don't consider it a negative psyop, because it doesn't. It only has a few things in common with Operation Trust, And so if you're a pseudo skeptic with a lot of confirmation bias, of course you're going to look like, oh look, it says trusted plan and Q said trusted plan, therefore they are equal. No, it's not. That's only a 1% similarity. Now, what about the other 99%? You know what I mean? You got to think a little more critically than that.
Yeah. No, you make an excellent point. I talked to Jordan Sather about this as well a while back. Being at this, Jordan Sather who has researched QAnon since the beginning, basically, as his own channel. But he said the same thing, confirming what you just said, that it is actually a psychological operation, but a positive one. You can use it in a positive sense. It's not necessarily negative. Not all psyops are bad. And even these slogans, what people say, trust the plan, where we go one, we go all, and all of that. People can get hooked on some plan in the savior projections. Everybody reacts differently, obviously. But you can also see it almost as a motivational slogan to get people pumped, similar like a coach in a team, we're going to make it right now, so that is, I feel, necessary in this day and age as well, a healthy optimism in the sense. But then obviously people project into all kinds of their own stuff, hopes and wishful thinking in a so-called plan when they don't even know what it truly is, because they're not going to reveal the ultimate plan, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, right. And the key things that the material was advocating, we were talking about, being a responsible citizen and voting and, activism, things like that. So they were encouraging people to play a very responsible and assertive role as a voting and politically active citizen, while on the other hand saying, trust the plan, which if you think about it, what does that really mean? Basically, it means, number one, don't give up and commit suicide. And number two, don't jump the gun and try to take out political people yourself. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because if they were to do that, that would pretty much discredit the entire thing. That's it's not the time for that currently. Yeah. So if you were to do that prematurely, it would totally 100% backfire. Yeah. And so I don't see it as pacification so much as trying to smooth down the feather so people don't do irresponsible things to themselves or to others.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I feel similar to you. Regardless of what happened, it already played its positive role, because similar to you, I see so many people, quote, waking up to issues in the world, to the corruption, which maybe, again, we may have been aware of, but I see it in my own work, the work I do with Laura, people, that materials help them to, trigger a certain awakening, right? And more is needed, obviously, in the long run, beyond just information and all of that, and beyond waiting for somebody just to arrest the cabal, because we need to engage, as you know, in also inner work, the spiritual evolution, the evolution of consciousness, to really, quote unquote, ascend, not in a New Age term, but ascend to a higher level of being on a collective level. And right now, in a collective dark night of the soul, you can see it even astrologically. The US is going through its Pluto return, so the underworld is coming up, so to speak, within and without. But on that note, what you alluded to as well, do you feel like what we are witnessing around, that there will be actually, might come head to head to a true civil war and more violent uprising of the citizens if it keeps going like that? Or what do you feel in that regard?
So if there is no military sting operation, and there's no, if that part of the system does not do its job, then it falls back upon the people to do something. Yeah. And considering there are between 70 and 80 million people who voted for Trump, and you can't vote for Trump without being clued into a lot of things that only used to be, even 10 years ago, used to be considered fringe conspiracy ideas. Right. So we've got dozens of millions of truthers now, conspiracy aware people, who have been instilled with a sense of patriotism, American cultural values, and their mythical, their mythological. Well, their archetypal model is the American Revolution. The Minuteman, the resistance to tyranny. So that already has programmed into it the idea of an actual uprising against a tyrannical force. So there's a cultural segment that's sort of, I think they're both dreading it, and some of them are itching for it. So exactly. That's where the momentum is headed if the proper authorities don't do their job and arrest this before it gets out of hand.
Yeah. I think obviously then also the cabal deep state, they are terrified of this because they keep cracking down still. Even now, as I just mentioned yesterday, there was a whole CNN special about, debunking and demonizing QAnon with all the fallacies and nonsense and projections as usual. They're still cracking down on it. They even want to push the left, even was it AOC or other people, to call Trump supporters domestic terrorists, right? Anybody who was against, Biden and whatnot, and definitely anybody who followed Q and all of that, to really, demonize them. And in essential, it's also like a lot of what's happening, and I want to get your insight in that as well, ties into like the communist color revolution playbook, right? All of it, what we're seeing now, that's what I see, connect the dots more and more, has been building up for decades, of infiltrating the institutions, the media, the big tech, education, in all of that, Hollywood as well, with these socialist, Marxist, far leftist view, not openly communist, right, but cultural Marxism and all of that. And that, a lot of people are severely conditioned and programmed. And that's kind of like, quote, scary, or the danger, because a lot of people start to support that pathology of the left, like they're justifying censorship, and even from the family, Laura had an encounter with a family member who she justified that people are being called domestic terrorists. We need to crack them down. Of course, they need to be canceled and censored and all of that. So that's kind of almost, from an even divine perspective, communism or socialism is in a sense anti-divine. Right, is almost a system of the archonic, draconian forces, whatever you may want to call it from a hyperdimensional perspective. But it's been literally building up. So right now we are essentially in the end game. Does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, these political orientations. I mean, they are just macroscopic reflections of our own individual psychology. If you look at within ourselves, we got the shadow, the ego. And you can call it the higher self or the superego, or whatever you want to call it, the spirit. But these things, I mean, you also got like left brain type circuits and right brain type circuits. All those things can be projected outwards, and then when you look at it on a societal scale, you find institutionalized versions of that. Mm-hmm. And what you find amongst the far left, amongst Marxists and communists, is the institutionalization of narcissism, sociopathy, psychopathy, everything like that. The shadow, ego, all that turns into that. Mm-hmm. Okay, and you could say the same for fascism. It's just like it's just a different form of it. The communism, Marxism, it's more like the feminine version of darkness, and fascism is more the masculine version.
And the reason I say that is because the left, they use a lot of mind games, emotional manipulation, like not violence right away, but a lot of like psychological manipulation. That's why it's more feminine. Whereas fascism, it's more like, rise to power and smash a boot on your face and all that kind of stuff. So that's a more masculine form of it.
Right.
I mean, they're both, two arms of the same beast, two arms of the shadow, two arms of the ego. And so you have other cultural institutions that seem to embody more of the capability of reason, a lot of the values that the whole patriot movement stands for, it's quite holistic, I would say, like wholesome, whole family values and integrity, ethics, philosophy, fairness. I mean, that's what most of the American system was originally founded on, this whole idea of like an enlightened republic kind of a thing. So that's why we are now sort of in an endgame of sorts that is the outward expression and clashing between what is similar to our own internal clashing between the ego part of us and the whole higher spirit part of us. So that's why it is, it's never been about political parties. It's always been about good versus evil, light versus dark.
Right.
And that's sort of what we're in right now. And beyond this whole political thing, it's going to extend beyond that into the alien sphere as well.
Right.
It's going to keep escalating upwards.
Exactly. We just really passed out dealing with the basic 3D level of this whole setup and what's happening. So let's get into that in the second hour. But I like your analogy. It's so true. Like the pathological left can be linked to or compared to like toxic feminism. The toxic feminine, very manipulative, a lot of gaslighting, we've been completely gaslit also with regards to COVID and the vaccines and all of that. And this is just insanity right now of asking for double masks and all of that. What's your take on that? Like right now, because it's also like, again, like more people falling into the illusion and becoming more fear-based and out of their own free will want the vaccine, while other people more, see the truth. And even ironically or weirdly, like maybe even only an hour after Biden's inauguration, the WHO comes out, I don't know if you saw that, admitting that the PCR tests are not necessarily very accurate. Right. So what do you see happening there with this whole COVID/vaccine agenda?
Yeah, I mean, it shows that it was never about the science. It was always about politics and control. I mean, like even now, for example, right? You got people like Dr. Fauci saying, wear 2 masks, wear 3 masks. How come they never say the words N95? Which is actually what is effective against filtering out viruses. They never mention that. They always tell you wear these stupid cloth masks and double them up and triple them up. Come on, it's not like it's not like you can't buy N95 masks now. I mean, they're back in production. So it's a stupid thing. And the only reason why they say that is for the psychological impact of it. Yeah. That's why China is doing that stupid thing with the anal swabs all of a sudden. Yeah. It's a sadistic, demonic dehumanization of people. It's like if demons had control and now they just wanted to torture the hell out of you. Yeah. That's what they would do. I mean, that's why they're no different from, these anal probing aliens doing injections. Exactly. It's all a reflection of the same continuum of sickness and delusion.
No, absolutely. And then also ties into the vaccine. I mean, this really is genetic manipulation ultimately, right? The mRNA vaccine, change your vaccines, ties into nanotechnology particles. It sets also the stage for the next agenda or the next level of transhumanism, of merging man with machine, of almost like disconnecting us as far as they can from spirit to create their own create humanity's bodies as a vessel for their, incarnate opportunities, so to speak. Does that make sense in a way? The long-term goal?
I think the vaccine also has implications for depopulation and political control. Because one thing I do agree with, some of these doctors, like Dr. Lee Merritt, what she pointed out. She suggests that some of these vaccines are actually binary weapons, and that you get injected once or twice with them, and now it conditions your body so that in the future, it could be months from now, it could be years from now, another virus comes along, which ordinarily would not be a problem, but because you've already been primed, like a lock and key system towards that, it's going to wipe you out. It's going to kill you. So I think there's a big risk of that, for sure. And of course, these vaccines they're totally rushed, and of course now they're backfiring, in that there are a lot of reports now of people getting disabled from it or outright dying. And I mean, the bottom line is, if you're old enough and frail enough to need the vaccine because you're scared of COVID, you're also old and frail enough to get the worst side effects from the vaccine and most likely possibly even die.
Yeah.
And if you're young enough to not get bad side effects from the vaccine, then you're young enough to not even need it in the first place. Exactly. So it's totally backwards. Yeah. No, I mean, the COVID, from all the statistics out there, it's only about 2 to 3 times worse than influenza.
Exactly. I know. And then let alone they still do not promote or even censor anybody who talks about vitamin C, zinc, or just natural ways of boosting your immune system and all of it.
And you mentioned WHO, not long after the inauguration, coming out saying that PCR tests were problematic. And also now they're starting to admit that, hey, hydroxychloroquine was okay. And Facebook admitted that they were wrong to censor information on it.
That's true.
Conveniently, right after the election.
Exactly. It's almost like Biden is being set up to he's doing all the right thing. Now Biden is in power and COVID is maybe not as scary as much, but you still need to get the vaccine or something like that, right?
And that's another reason why there is a positive strategy to having Biden in office. Mm-hmm. And that now with, now a lot of the globalists, they're what do you call it? That they're not as alarmed anymore. Mm-hmm. And so now they're starting to kind of back off and become tranquilized. And so now they're easing the pressure on it. So if, let's say, there were a turnaround and let's say there's a second inauguration this year and, fulfill this idea that Trump's going to be back or something like that. Well, now it's been proven that, hey, hydroxychloroquine isn't bad. Right. Now it's been proven that PCR tests are problematic, Yeah. And so now you piggyback off that, and now you can improve things, having, disarmed a lot of these control mechanisms that were active for the past year.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of a quote. I forgot who said that also, never interfere with an enemy in the process of destroying itself. Right. So that's kind of what we're seeing as well in this sense.
Yeah. That's art of war stuff. I mean, Trump and the entire team, they know the art of war inside and out. They know it like the back of their hand.
Yeah.
So a lot of what's happening, including the deception, the misinformation, the feigning of weakness, and all the contradictions that people realize, hey, there's something weird going on. A lot of that is just, psychological strategy, which unfortunately, keeps us in the dark too. But it is what it is.
Yeah. Great, Tom. But before you finish up the first hour and go into the second hour, what can you get, what's maybe some advice you can give people? Because I see a lot of people, they're just also freaking out, dealing with fear, information overload, don't know what to do, kind of like, everybody, a lot of people going into the worst case scenario, into their projections. So what can we do to kind of keep grounded, so to speak, and keep the spirits up?
Well, I mean, obviously you can't be, see, here's the thing. If you watch the news all day long, you're reading the same stuff over and over, and then you're reading people's comments on it and reading variations of it. There's no need to spend all day looking at that stuff, because when you do, you're saturating your subconscious with it, and that's going to kind of resonate you with that particular future more and more and more. It's going to drag you down. So the important thing to do is to set a limit. Let's say 1 hour per day max. It could be at the beginning of the day, it could be at the end of the day, it could be split it up in 2 half-hour segments. That's when you kind of look through it, see if there's anything important that you need to know that pertains to you and your situation. And then you can start, thinking about that and acting on it. But the rest of the day, you have to balance it with anything at all that's positive, that reinforces your morale. So in Gab, for example, I recently posted a long list of values of a new and better civilization. Things like truth, wisdom, harmony, understanding, transcendence, spirituality. A list like that, just by reading it, you can start remembering oh yeah, this is what I stand for. This is what I like. This is what I resonate with. So when you meditate on that stuff, now you're feeding that into your subconscious. And now you're actually increasing your spiritual strength, which gives you the ability to resist the psychological pounding that a lot of this news dishes out, when you read it. So that's why it's important to focus on that stuff, meditate, research, focus on the higher 4D, 5D spiritual side of the equation, and not get yourself stuck in the 3D level of it all day long.
No, very well said. And on that, Laura and I, we've been doing this as well, limiting our social media thing, because it can get you sucked in, information warfare, and you want to post and all of that, but you need to kind of also almost let things happen in a sense, right? Because a lot of things happening that are beyond our control anyway, right? And also it's more about, like you said, the frequency anchor, not forgetting the ultimate goal is really to connecting with who we truly are. And we cannot do this if we're always distracted by the screen. So very well said. Yeah, let's take a break and then continue. Second hour, I want to dive definitely into more the 4D, the possible alien agenda, possible timeline reality split. You and I, we've talked about this before, written about. And again, for viewers or listeners who are not aware of your work, they can find you at montalk.net, montalk.net. And you have a now profile on Gab as well?
I do. Yes, it's gab.com/Montalk.
Excellent. Perfect. And with that being said, thank you so much, Tom. And also anybody who wants access to the second hour, please go to my website, veilofreality.com. You can sign up to the membership to get access to all the second hour of our podcast and the membership forum. And we'll be right back.